Spend a little more time looking at modules. In particular, we're going to look at other ways that we can access and use modules. Recall previously that we said that a module is just a collection of Python code that we can use as long as we do an import. Once we import the module, then the contents of the module, say the functions or the data within that module, are available to us, and we can use it just as if we had written it ourselves. In this particular case, we want to look at other ways that we can gain access to the contents of the module and other ways that we can import the module to be able to use its contents. The example that we had used previous was the math module, and we had said that the math module is not available in the default Python environment. So for example, if I type math, it says math is not defined. So obviously if I try to use the square root function and say what's the square root of 56, it's going to say math is not defined, therefore of course square root is not defined. Recall also that it was possible for me to ask to get help on a particular module, but in this case, once again, because math is not defined, it doesn't exist in the default Python environment, I'm not going to be able to get help either. So what we want to do is look at a couple of different ways that we can sort of work with these modules and get access to the module before we might do an import, and then look at importing the module in a different way to be able to access the names of the functions and so on differently as well. So the first thing let's look at is the help system. We said that we can't invoke the help system until we've imported the math module. Well, it turns out that that's not entirely true. There is a variation that we can use. We can say help, and then in quotes we can put the name of the module. If we do that, what happens is we're telling the Python environment to search outside of its default to look for an existence of the math module, and you can see that the result that we get is the same result that we got before. Now at this point math is still not defined. We haven't done an import, but by putting quotes around the name of the module we were able to go searching for that module, and the help system returns the contents, and we could now decide whether we really want to import that module, whether it contains the data or the functions that we want. It's also interesting to notice that we can do the same thing with function names. So I can say, let's look at math.squareroot, and you'll see that it says that this is a square root function in math. It returns the square root of its parameter. Again though, math.squareroot has not been defined because we've never done an import. So the help system is actually useful to us even if we've not imported a module, because we can simply put the name of the module in quotes and then the help system will search. It can be kind of a handy way to go looking at modules without actually importing them, say before you want to make a decision whether that's the module that is the correct one for the use that you're looking for. Now, once we know that this module is of interest to us, we can obviously do an import. The import that we used before was to simply say import name of the module. And once we do that, now, as we saw before, all of the functionality, so for example the factorial function, what's the factorial of 10? 3,628,800. The factorial function in the math module does that computation for us, or math.squareroot, as we saw before, gives us the floating point square root of 44. So once we do that import, we now can access the functions that exist in that module by using module name dot function name. It turns out that there's a slightly different variation on the import statement that you might see from time to time, and that is to import the contents of the module so that you can simply use the names of the functions without having to put the module name in front. Now, some might suggest that that's not a good idea because it means that you might lose track of which module a particular function actually lives in, but it is part of the import syntax, and so we should talk about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset the shell. If I go up here in idle to shell and say restart, you'll see what happened was the message came back to me that the shell has been restarted. What that means then is that everything the shell had before has been lost. So, for example, math is once again undefined. Now when I do this import, instead of saying import math, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what's called the from syntax. I'm going to say from math import. Now, what I want to do is say, what do I want to import from the math module? Well, I could give a specific function here. I could say from math import square root, or from math import sine. But the more common thing to do is simply to say from math import everything. And everything is denoted by the star. So from math import star. Now, when I try to use a function from the math library, what's interesting is that I no longer have to put math dot in front. That is, when I import using the from syntax, the names of all the functions as well as the data values can simply be accessed directly. And in fact, if I try to do it using math.py, once again it tells me that math is not defined. Why? Because I didn't import math, I actually imported the individual functions and data that were contained within the module. So there are two ways to do imports. One is simply to import the module and then use the name when we access functions and data. And the other is to use the from syntax, which means we don't have to use the name of the module. But remember, once you do that, you may not remember where a particular function is coming from when you go back and look at your code later on.